Good morning, church. My name is Carson, and I am so glad that you are here. Welcome to church. I'm really excited about today. Today has been really good so far, and I'm excited that you are here. There's a couple things that we want you to know about that are coming up in the next couple weeks that we really don't want you to miss. The first thing is Night of Worship. We're having a night of worship on March 20th at 7 o'clock in this room. You don't want to miss it. We're using that night to start our Easter season and start to shift our perspective towards looking towards Easter, which is actually not that far away. I know that's a little bit hard to believe. So night of worship, March 20th, 7 o'clock, you want to be here. Make plans to be here. Another thing that's happening that same weekend is that next Monday morning on the 23rd of March is our next Parent Network event. And our good friend Stuart Hall from Atlanta is going to be here that night speaking life and encouragement into the parents of our church. So if you're a parent, you really should be there. It's going to be a very helpful night and helping parent your kid through the world that we live in today, full of anxiety, full of depression. And I think he's going to speak a lot of life into you that night. So I would really strongly advise you to be there. Church, stand to your feet. We're getting ready to worship together. And I just want to encourage everybody, no matter where you are, no matter kind of what you're walking through, if you're in a really good season or you're in a really hard season, I hope this speaks encouragement to you. I've been praying this prayer to the Lord recently to just consistently ask him to speak life into my soul. For me to rely on him, for me to put myself in a position that I am dependent on him to show up in my life every single day. And as I was praying about today, I feel like he spoke John 10, just kind of over me and over our church. And I hope that this encourages you. John records Jesus talking in verse 14 of chapter 10, and Jesus very simply says, I am the good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. It's very consistent of Jesus to speak in analogies, and I believe what he's just very clearly saying to you is that he is good and he knows you. He knows your name. He knows what you're walking through. He knows the hard things. He knows the good things. He wants to celebrate in the good and sit beside you in the hard. And I think sometimes, I know this for me, and I've been struggling with this morning, is insecurity gets to be the loudest voice in our mind. Whether you're at work, you're wondering what people think about you, or you're in school and you're curious of what your friends think or what the people on Instagram think, or wherever your people are, you're constantly wondering what others think. And I think we do this just as a visual like analogy for you this morning. I was kind of thinking about this if you think about the palm of your hand, and if you put something in the palm of your hand and you close your hand down real tightly and you hold really strongly onto it, no one can see it, no one can get to it. No one can change what's in your hand if you're holding on to it. I think this is what we do with our identity. I think this is what we do with what we think about ourselves. We put it in our hand and we tighten down on it to where we won't let anybody speak into it. And I believe very strongly this morning that if you would just open your hand, and if you would do this physically, I feel like it helps remind your heart of something very important. If you take your posture from being held up and being controlled only by you, and you just open it up, and allow God to speak life into your soul this morning, I believe it will be a world of difference for you. Because I believe this morning, he is looking at you, he knows your name, and he wants to speak life into your soul. So let's worship towards that today. Let's worship Jesus in this place, church.
Heavenly Father says that we are. Come on, we sing. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. It's true. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Yes, I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, who is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, in my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. For I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Hallelujah. Christ is risen from the grave. Hallelujah. Christ is risen from the grave. Prodigals welcome home, sinner now saved. For the God who died came back to life, and everything is changed. Hallelujah. Christ is risen from the grave. Hallelujah. Christ is risen from the grave. Oh, death, where is your sting? Oh, fear, where is your power? For the mighty King of Kings has disarmed you, delivered and redeemed. Eternal life resides. Oh, praise His name forever. Hallelujah. Christ is risen from the grave. Hallelujah. Christ is risen from the grave. And all throughout eternity, our song will be the same. Hallelujah. Christ is risen from the grave. And on the day you call me in to heaven's sweet embrace, I'll see your scars, your open arms, and the beauty of your face. Through tears of joy, I'll lift my voice in everlasting praise. Hallelujah. Christ is risen from the grave. And on the day you called me in to heaven's sweet embrace, I'll see your scars, your open arms, and the beauty of your face. Through tears of joy, I'll lift my voice in everlasting praise. Hallelujah, Christ is risen from the grave. What an amazing, amazing truth to sing this morning. And this next song, it's actually a new song. We're doing it at all of our campuses this week and next week. And as we heard it, this message that we've been kind of living in, this Being Human series, it just really resonated with where we're going and where we've been going over the past few weeks. And I love this song, the truths that are inside of it. And there's really two truths that lie within this song. And one is really, really easy to grab onto. One is really, really easy to say, yeah, I'm all about that. I can praise to that. I can worship to that. I can lift my hands to that. The other one's a little bit more difficult and a little bit more challenging for us a lot of times. And the song starts and it reminds us of who God is. It says, you make all things work together for my future and my good, that he loves us, he cares for us. It says, when I doubt it, Lord, remind me that I'm wonderfully made. And I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake, that he can take all that we have this morning, not just the good stuff. He can take the bad, he can take the ugly, and he can turn it into something beautiful, because he's the God who redeems. He redeems people, but he also redeems circumstances. He redeems all that we have, and that's true today, and that's worth celebrating, that's worth worshiping, that's worth praising him for that. But there's this other side of this song. It says, you make all things work together for your glory and your name. And this song is called Canvas and Clay. And the line says that you're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. And we love that. Hey, we want you to be an artist. We want you to be a potter. We want you to make something beautiful. But a lot of times we miss that means that we have to surrender the title of artist. We have to surrender the title of being the one that is making this thing happen. It means that we're the canvas, and not always are we gonna approve of where we're going or see where we're going, but there may be some colors that get splashed up there that we say, God, I trust you. I believe in that. And so there's really just this idea that, hey, I see my good. When you say you work together for my good, I see it as this picture. We have to open our hands, like Carson was saying today. Say, hey, I'm gonna open my hands and I'm gonna give you the pen, I'm gonna give you the markers, I'm gonna give you the paintbrush, because you're the artist and I wanna trust you in that. And the beautiful thing about this is that you make all things work together for my future and my good, and you make all things work together for your glory and your name. They are the same. Because as we hand over the paintbrush, our lives are nothing more than, or nothing less than, this ability for people to see the radiation of God's glory, for people to see how amazing he is, to see his love, to see his goodness, to see his faithfulness. That's who we become, and that's who he creates. That's who our canvas begins to look like. And so today, as we sing this song, our challenge is to do two things. The first is to cling to this reality that he can take all we have and make it something beautiful. He can take our mess, our chaos, and he can turn it into his glory. But the second thing that we embrace is this reality that we have to open our hands. So we cling to that truth, but we open our hands to surrender the authority of being the artist and the maker. So let's sing this song. The chorus goes like this. And you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. Oh, you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for in my mother's womb. You formed me with your hands, known and loved by you. Before I took a breath, and when I doubted, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. And you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. There's a healing light just beyond the clouds. Though I walk through fire, I see clearly now, and I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. And you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. And you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. Even when we doubt, come on. And when I doubt it, Lord, remind me how wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. And I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. Well, you're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. And you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for when I doubt it, Lord, remind me how wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. And I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. Oh, and when I doubt it, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. And I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. 'Cause you're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay.
A couple months ago, I was at a family friend's wedding, and as I was walking out, there was a lady sitting behind everybody that was attending the wedding with a canvas in front of her. And she had been sitting there the entire time, and I noticed her on the way in, and then I noticed her again on the way out. And the connection that clicked for me during that song, during the 9 o'clock service, is that she was totally locked into that painting. That was her only reason for being there. That was what she was there for. Today, that is God. That was God yesterday, that is God today, that is God tomorrow towards us. He is sitting there looking at us, looking at our life, looking at our hopes, looking at our dreams, looking at our struggles. And that is the only thing on his mind. That is why he came to earth. He came for us. And when we say he's the artist of our life. Church, this is important. This is good news that the God of all creation is solely focused on you and me. That's good, church. That's really good. Let's celebrate that together. Let's celebrate it loudly because that is really, really good news. Church, you can have a seat. Thank you so much for being bold enough to stand and declare that together in this room. That is a bold truth, and it's an important one for us to remember, not only today, but tomorrow and for the days and weeks to come. Volunteers, you can go ahead and come down front to receive our offering today. I would just encourage you to continue to worship in the way that you give. Worship is an act of trust, and so is giving, and it is hard, but it's a good hard. Because when we release something, just like when we release our identity, God does something special, not only in us, but through us to the rest of the world. So I would really encourage you to take that step today as the volunteers pass those baskets. And then Mike is gonna be out in just a second to continue the series called Being Human.
Good morning. Real quick poll. How many guys meant to come at 9 or 9:15, right? You're early birds, but you like, oh, we lost an hour, and you're like, decided to come at 11. Anybody in here? All right, good. Welcome to the later service for all of you guys who are doing that. I thought the same thing, except I had to be here at the early service. I was like, hey, I'm gonna take it. It's so funny because as I thought about this, we're talking about a series that's called Being Human. And we're kind of up against some things because no one really considers very deeply of what it means to be human. I mean, philosophers do and people like that, but like The normal is we just are. We're human beings. That's what we are. So we don't really think more about it. And what I'm trying to do is to give us a picture of what God has created and called us, and to see ourselves as a part of that, and not only a part of that, the part that's to contribute and to steward everything else that's been made. That we are called to rule and to reign over this over the earth and everything that is in it. We have been called to be stewards of that, to contribute to it. Everything that we do is towards that end. And so it's interesting, even at the very beginning, we lose 1 hour and we lose our minds, right? It's like, oh my gosh, you'd think that, we just can't take it. And so human beings are made for rhythms. You know this. There's a lot of illustrations we could use. This is why if we did, everybody start, buddy, you're a young man. Everybody start doing something. We'd have this song in our head. We were made, our hearts beat with rhythm. Everything is rhythmic. We know this. And yet so much of our lives is just in these exhaustive just sprints and collapses. And we sort of lost this sense of rhythms. And this is part of the way, the fabric in which we've been made to be human. It's interesting when human beings show up on the earth, what their first assignment is. I mean, think about this. For 6 days, God's been creating. He's been doing things, the moon and the stars and the planets and the vegetation and the mountains. He created Mount Everest. He called it up out of the earth. He separated the waters and he created land. Then he makes the livestock, and then at the pinnacle of creation, that's how it's thought of in the way we have it recorded for us in Genesis 1, the pinnacle of this, it says that God, he says everything was good. He created mankind in his own image. He created them male and female, and he called them very good. That's the 6th day. He says, I want you to rule and I want you to reign. I want you to contribute. This is your, tomorrow show up and we're going to get started. What's the first thing they did? What's the first day look like for Adam and Eve, for human beings? It's to rest. Hey, show up for work. What are you gonna do? First thing we're gonna do is rest. It's like, what? Like, it makes no sense. Like, what is going on? He's establishing rhythms. The very first day, the very first thing that human beings are invited into is to rest. And I think what God is saying to us, he's like, look around at all this stuff. You weren't here when I made it, so guess what? It probably means I don't really need you to do this. It kind of takes some of the pressure off us. The first thing I want you to do is to rest, and then we're gonna get to work. And what you begin to find in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew culture, do you know how the calendar was organized? The day began the night before. The next day began at sundown because it created a rhythm. It established patterns in the way we're to live. In other words, what it is that we rest in order to work. Rest is first. We rest in order to work. We show up in creation. The first activity is to rest, to prepare for what God has for us the next day. So when the sun starts to go down, we rest to prepare for what is to happen next day. That is not so anymore. It's a badge of honor to burn the midnight oil. It's a badge of honor to burn the candle at both ends. It's a badge of honor to do these things. And what happens is we work, crash. Work, crash. And we don't ever find rest. There's no rhythms in our lives. This is more important than we know, because what I want to do today is I want to kind of pick up where we left off last week. I mentioned and we talked about this idea that God, right, is glorified in us and we are satisfied in him. That the solution to getting your satisfaction, your heart's desire, is actually to delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. We all nod our head and go, man, that's a really cool thing. That is easy to agree with. It is very hard to do. And what I wanted to do last week is I needed to convince you that believing is as hard as anything. We can occupy our time, we can do a lot of things, but to believe something, to trust something is much harder than to do something, because when we do things, we control it, we manufacture it, we make it so. But to believe something puts it out of our control and out of our ability to make it happen, to rest, to trust, to live in these rhythms we're established to live in. And it is directly connected to your capacity to delight yourself in the Lord. So today I'm gonna tell you sort of how to do that. As human beings, we were created to contribute. We've been given the ability, we've kind of explored this the last few weeks and kind of glimpses here and there, but that we have been given the ability to think. I know that's shocking to some people. We've been given the capacity and the ability to think, to create, to understand. This past week, we got to celebrate one of my favorite authors, one of my favorite thinkers, a person a writer who's influenced me probably as much as any writer on the planet. Monday was, anybody know? Dr. Seuss Day. It was Dr. Seuss's birthday. I grew up with an elementary school. My mom was an elementary school librarian. We had Dr. Seuss out the wazoo, or the snuzzle, or whatever word you want to use to describe it. It was everywhere. My mom she read us books. We read Dr. Seuss over and over. I love Dr. Seuss. I still have a collection of many of his books. He has, guffs, and he has snubs with gloves, and he has slops and the Vipper of Vip, and all these things that he created and made up and did. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, the cat in the hat, thing one, thing two, all these things. And there's just a vast imagination, array of things that blow me away. And one of my favorite books that he wrote is called Oh, the Thinks You Can Think. He says you can think about red, you can think about pink, you can think up a horse. Oh, the thinks you can think. And he goes on this whole journey about all the things that our minds have the capacity to create and to contribute and to imagine. In the very end, he says, think left and think right, think low and think high. Oh, the thinks you can think up if you'll only try. And what I think is that a whole large swatch of the problem that we face in our culture, maybe in your life, in my life, is that we just don't take time to think. To put your mind to work, to think. What happens to us is we start saying and repeating the same things we've always said without ever pressing to see if we still believe them or if they're true. We have default responses to almost every conversation we have. This is why when you deal with marriage issues or teenage issues, it's like conversations become so predictable. Do you know why? Because this person says something, that person says something, that person says something, and then it's like let me guess what's gonna happen the next time this happens, because it's the same thought line, because no one sticks a wrench in the spokes and says, we're not gonna think like this anymore. It's the reason that I think Romans is given to us the way that it is. Romans 8, it says that the mindset on the flesh is death, but the mindset on the spirit is life and peace. Romans 12, we talked about this. We are transformed, not by keeping the law or keeping the rules. We're transformed by the renewing of our minds. To offer your body as a living sacrifice, to avail yourself, to live life as a human requires us to think. We use words all the time. We use familiar words. We use unfamiliar words. I'm so grateful that my mom grew up with a Reader's Digest, and she would learn a new word a week, and she would talk to me about these words. And I'm like, oh my gosh, well, who cares? But I'm so glad because I've learned that I do. When I see a word in a book, I've read books that I don't understand, things I didn't know I could learn about. Things I grew up thinking, like I just talked to a young kid today, and he's like, my brain doesn't work like everybody else. It's like, me neither. That's a great thing. Learn how to use it. Think. Put your mind to work. It's interesting that we use this idea. We understand incredible things in our world. Incredible things, beautiful things, magnificent things. And we've got a tremendous capacity to take very complex things and to break them down into understandable components. The problem is what most of us do, we reduce and we reduce and we reduce and we reduce to understand, and we understand in order to predict and control. This is not what our minds have been given to us for. I was watching a documentary the other day. I found documentaries on Netflix. This is like a whole new world I didn't know about, so I'm super stoked. I watched the ZZ Top documentary. It was amazing. And they were originally called The Moving Sidewalks. I don't know if you knew that or not. It's like, this is crazy, I didn't know this. And became ZZ Top. And so some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. Go look it up. And there's nothing to do with the message. But I was watching this one on the earth and on the universe, the universe. There was a scientist sitting there, and he was in this in his little lab, and he had his, his spreadsheets and his board, and he was talking about the sun. He was talking about the sun as this sort of nuclear power plant that probably has about 5 billion more years of fuel in it. And he talked about how this happens. And he's just casually saying, the sun is 93 million miles away from the earth, and it's 1 million miles wide. And you can put 1.3 million Earths in the sun, and the center core heats up to millions of degrees. And he talks about these particles that collide into each other and then they fuse together and they move and they become photons and they move. He goes, oh, and they go from one layer of the sun to the next. They travel about 180,000 miles in 4 minutes. And then it gets to us in 8 minutes. And he's talking about this like it just makes perfect sense. I'm just sitting here going, I don't even know what 1 million miles is. It's 93 million miles. It's a ball of fire floating in space. And we're like zipping around it. You know, and you're just like, and they just, oh, it makes perfect sense. I'm like, no, it doesn't make perfect sense. It's mind-blowing to look around. And this is when he says the heavens declare the glories of God. He wants us to think. He wants us to study. He wants us to look. He wants us to understand. But he wants us to understand not so we go, oh, that makes perfect sense. The heavens aren't given to us to understand and figure out the way God gets things done. There's something else at stake, his glory. I actually did a series talking about this a few years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, called Getting Nowhere. It was on mental health. And in that series, I spent about a few months interviewing a bunch of friends of mine from different fields of study, psychiatry, psychology, neurology. I studied folks from academic perspective, folks from medical perspective, just all kinds of things. And what I heard over and over and over again, even from the most ardent scientists, was, Mike, you realize this is not just flesh and blood. There's a spiritual thing to this. There's something else at play. So it kind of got me thinking about how our bodies work and our minds work. And the Bible, talks about this, a lot, especially when it comes to renewing our minds and this being the means of transformation, the way the Holy Spirit uses or directs is in this renewal part that happens up here. And so I began to look, and I realized that every function in the human body has a specific job description in terms of what it does to make the body work. And it was things like this. If you look it up, you can Google it. Just Google like circulatory system. Some of you are gonna do it right now. Don't do that. Pay attention up here. And it's the circulatory system, and it says, or the respiratory system. The respiratory system is designed to oxygenate the blood. It's like, okay, that makes sense. And then it says, well, the circulatory system is designed to circulate oxygen throughout the body to nourish the cells, and the digestive system gets nourishment, nutrients, and everything has a function until you get to the mind. And when you Google or you look up what's the function of the mind or the brain, all it really says is it's the executive center. It makes decisions. Decisions about what? Like it makes decisions according to what? What is the mind really designed to do? Because there's got to be a reason why we reason about things. There has to be something drive, some purpose, some meaning behind it. And I realized that nothing has this. And what I began to think is, God, why have you given us a mind? Why have you given us a brain? And we see it in our childlikeness when we're growing up. We see it in Dr. Seuss, that there's something that kind of awakens in us, a sense of curiosity and a sense of wonder that we kind of get lost in. This is what it means to be human, to marvel at things, to behold things, to sense beauty. And so the working definition that I use for my mind, that I'll kind of convey it to you and offer it to you, you're welcome to use it, but that my mind isn't for the purpose of figuring things out so I can control things and get predictable outcomes. That's what most of us do. But the mind is given to awaken our hearts. The reason that you think and you should think is not just to figure things out. That's not going far enough. You want to figure things out and understand things that drive you to wonder, to awaken our heart. I mean, you know that pure pragmatic efficiency is not sufficient for the human experience. No one has a marriage where the bills are paid, the kids are fine, and the rules are kept, and you go, oh, we have a good marriage. It's not enough. It's not sufficient. It might make things easier, but if there's no affection, if there's no love, if there's nothing satisfying about it, it doesn't help. It doesn't contribute to that. So to ignore the fact that we're made to delight and muse and feel and thrill is to really significantly diminish the human experience. And yet we've made it sort of a badge of honor to grind and to hustle. And God said, no, you're kind of made to worship. You're made to come alive, to be alive. And so I want to talk about a really a significant thing that helps us to do that. We've been using this idea, and one more thing too, when I think about language and words, we tend in our efficiency economy to think that words are designed, or language is designed to communicate. Is communication important? Yes, or else your kids don't get picked up from school, right? It's a problem. So it's important, but that's not the purpose. The purpose of language is expression. When God spoke a word, he caused things to come into being. There was a creation aspect to this. Our words have the capacity to create realities. They have the capacity to design what people believe about themselves and think about themselves. They have the capacity, ideas get spoken out and then they become realities because people put their hands, they contribute. This is what it means to contribute and to steward, to be a steward and exercise dominion over the rule that we have. That's what I'm trying to get us to understand as a church. That what threatens, the threat of sin is not that we become immoral people, it's that we don't exercise the authority of which or for which we have been given. That's the problem. And so it's not just to go do things. So I wanna kind of write up here and I'm actually changing this up. This is way different than the earlier service, just because I didn't like it. That happens sometimes. So this idea of satisfaction, because I think it's important, to delight, to find delight, to find glory. These are all really, really important things. And we've been looking at this Sermon on the Mount that Jesus gave in Matthew chapter 5. And if you have your Bibles, we're gonna look in Isaiah 58 if you wanna play along. Isaiah, if you turn to the middle of your Bible, you'll be in Psalms and you go just to the right and you'll find Isaiah and then chapter 58, wherever it is, 58, right there. And so the Sermon on the Mount is this countercultural message that Jesus gives. And he says, blessed or satisfied or happy or content are the poor in spirit, right? Satisfied, happy, content, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those, satisfied are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Satisfied are the peacemakers. Satisfied are those who are persecuted even for the gospel, for his name. All these things are mentioned. He goes on, he starts talking about the fact that, right, if someone asks you to go 1 mile, you should go a second mile. If someone forces you one, you should go two. If someone hits you on the left side of your face, or the right side of your face, you should turn and offer them the other cheek. And you kind of scratch your head and go, surely you can't be serious. And he just keeps going. And he says things, if you have heard it said, thou shalt not kill. And everybody agrees. He says, but I tell you, if you hold hatred or contempt in your heart for another person, you have broken the command far worse than you thought you have if you just kept from killing them, if you just exercised restraint. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, if you look upon another with lust in your heart, something has gone wrong. And what you began to see and what we've been talking about is that the things that threaten our human experience, that cause us to lean into subhuman behavior, is typically a result of our inability to be satisfied in ourselves and, more importantly, in the way that we've been made. So we chase things. To harbor contempt toward a human being brings you a sense of justice or rightness at their expense, and it satisfies something in us. The chasing after lust, the chasing after pleasure, all these things promise, right, some sense of satisfaction. That's what he's saying. There's a whole other way for us to do this. And what happens to us when we're not satisfied, when we can't find that, we often start chasing it in other places, and a lot of times those places are illegitimate. And this has been the driver of this series, that the drift, what God has called us to in humanity, is to contribute and to rule such that there's unity and flourishing in the human condition. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what we're working for. That's what the church, the people of God, are the edge of that place on culture. We bring about unity and we bring about flourishing. And the drift in our culture is not towards that. It's towards division and competition. Sound familiar? To climb a ladder, to get a step ahead, to, the rat race, all these things are about how we're doing against someone else, not about bringing about unity and flourishing. It's about, flourishing might be a byproduct, but it needs to be a byproduct of me being number one. That's not the kingdom. That's not what Jesus came to do. And what Jesus reminds us of is that the law might help to ban subhuman behavior, but it does not redeem the beauty of being human. Because you don't commit adultery doesn't redeem the beauty of a marriage. Because you don't act and you don't kill someone does not reveal the beauty or display the beauty of what it means to love someone, especially someone who's hard to love. It's easier to kill them. This is the picture we've got to get in our head. This is mind-blowing stuff. This is different than what we do every day in our worlds and in our country, but this is the way we're called to live. If I were to ask you, and I will in just a minute, what is it when you don't get what you want? Where do you go? When you're frustrated, when you're just tired of waiting on something, you've worked hard enough, you've done enough, you've pursued enough, and now you deserve something, where do you go? Do you know? I know where I go. I know what threatens me in those moments when God is not doing what I want him to do. Specifically in that, I know where my pull is. Do you know? Do you know what happens to you? Is it a glass of wine? Is it 2 or 3 beers? Is it, I'm gonna sit back and smoke a little something, which is, I can talk about that later. So we come up, I'm not talking about that. Please don't. I want my mind better than that. I can assure you of that. What do you do? Do you sink into sort of video world or porn world? Or you get on social media and you start complaining about all the things that are going wrong. Where do you go when you're not getting, when you can't find satisfaction? So what I was trying to think about is there are a couple things that I think give us satisfaction. The fact that we are at some level pleasing. People say yes, or someone says yes about us. We're glad you're alive. There's the chase, or this idea that we are enough, that we are perfect, we are complete, we're full, we're whole. And then there's this beautiful sense of culmination where it's pleasure and delight and glee, and we squeal, right? There's something in us that just loves this. So if I said this is happening to you, you would go, woo, man, I can get behind that. I can get behind that. So here's what happens. Here's the language of this. The reason the rhythms are important, because what God does in the beginning in the human experience and what Jesus does in his sermon, and then what you see later on in Paul's writing, and you see it in Hebrews, is this rhythm of rest is really, really, really important for us to find satisfaction. And it's not just because you won't be grumpy. So you just need to nap and you won't be grumpy. This is not about not being grumpy. That's you've heard it said, do not be grumpy. But I tell you, if you aren't delightful, there's a problem. That's Mike's addition to the Sermon on the Mount, just in case you want to know. And so there's this idea, there's this way. And it uses the word Sabbath. So in the old covenant, it would be honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Make sure that you are resting on this day. And it wasn't just so you could take a nap. It was because you weren't going to be harvesting grain. You weren't going to be watering stuff. You weren't going to be tilling soil. You weren't going to be doing things that produce the outcomes that you desperately need. If you don't farm, you don't eat in the old culture. I tried to grow a garden about 5 years ago. I realized, man, if my family depended on me for that, we would starve. I was like, dude, thank you for Harris Teeter, man. They're already, you didn't have to dig, there you go, put them in the buggy and you're good. Back in the day, you had to trust. What if there was no rain? You're like, God, please, we got to have rain. Because if something didn't happen, you were fundamentally dependent. And this is what the Sabbath was about. If you read through the stories in the Old Testament, if you read through the history, you'll find that the Sabbath was always about declaring trust. It was a stake in the ground to say, we are trusting you for our provision by resting and trusting in what you're gonna do. We are preparing ourselves for what is to come. That's what the Sabbath is always about. In the book of Hebrews, it talks about the Sabbath as this place where we'll find rest, this soul rest. That's what Jesus invited us into. And here's how he says it. At the end of chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 4, the book of Hebrews, it says, this is the language that's used. He says, so we see that they were not able to enter into the rest, the Sabbath rest. We didn't experience rest, he says, because of their unbelief. They didn't believe, therefore they didn't experience rest. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful. Let us pay attention. Let us put our minds to work. That's what it's talking about. So that none of us will be found to having fallen short of it. To having fallen short. To having stopped short just before you found what you were looking for. Right? What if you chased her or him or this or that just before you were gonna be able to delight yourself in the Lord and find the desires of your heart? You just stopped just short. What if you were just short, right? I mean, think about this. What I was told when I was kind of going through my calling and all this, I was, right out of college and was kind of wrestling with call to ministry. Someone told me, said, Mike, you're gonna be a catalytic church planner. Now, how many of you guys know what a catalytic church planner is? Right, meaning I had no idea, I'd never heard of that before. What is that? I didn't want to be a church planter. That's not what I am. I don't consider myself a church planner. When we were starting Port City, we were like, God, we think you're gonna do something here. We want to be a part of that, and this is what my role in it was. But what they were told me, what was so appealing to me, they said, you're gonna be a catalytic church planner, which means you're gonna plant churches every 2 years. Do you know how thrilling that is to an ADD person? Every 2 years, I get to do something new. Sign me up every day, all day. Because I don't like sticking with anything for very long. And then I realized, man, if I'm gonna get married and have kids, I better learn how to stick with stuff for a long time because it's hard. And I read a book by a guy named Eugene Peterson. In fact, I didn't even read the book, I just read the cover of the book. And it was worth the price of the book. And the title is Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And as immediately God said, that's you. Long obedience in the same direction. You know what it means? I'm not going to stop short. When it came to wrestling through issues of sexuality and trying to understand all the stuff that God was asking me to prepare for marriage, and I didn't understand it, I said, I'm not gonna stop short. I'm gonna stay with what he said. I'm gonna trust him. When it came to you pick any issue, I was like, God, I'm not gonna prematurely enter into these places. I'm not gonna stop short. I'm gonna trust you. When it's come to relationships or conversations, I'm not gonna stop short. We have a phrase that we use around our staff and we say, hey, 100%. What we mean is most of us go 90% in our conversations and we don't say the 10%, which is the most important thing that needs to be said. So we'll all go 90% when it happens all the time. Hey, 100%, and then it's the next sentence. Because we just said we're not gonna stop short. We're not gonna not hold people accountable and lean into these things that just because they're hard, we're not gonna stop short because we believe that God has something on the other side for us. I think about my own life, my own sort of role here. It wasn't like, you just sign up and go, yeah, I'm gonna run. There were times when you wanna go do something else. There are times when it's easier to go do something else. You know what the mantra was? Long obedience in the same direction. Do you know what you find in that? You find how unbelievably faithful God is. And what he says to us in the passage we just read is, pay attention, think, so that you don't fall short of the promise that has been made available to you. That's what it's about. So here's Isaiah 58, and this whole thing, I'm just gonna have to set this up pretty quickly. I wanna read this, but it just basically, it's this idea of availing ourselves. Remember we talked about this. God, we wanna offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to you, for this is our spiritual act of worship. This is where we delight. And then we go, but what if this means I don't get this? And we withhold. And the challenge has been to bring it all. And that's the posture here. Everything, God, we're using everything to avail ourselves. My word this year is avail. So I'm just gonna drive everybody crazy with it it's all y'all's words now, because I'm gonna do this every week for the next year, but it's to avail ourselves, to make ourselves available to anything and everything he wants. And this is what it says, as we do this, here's what it says. Starting in verse 10 of chapter 58, the prophet Isaiah, he's famous for writing about the prophecies of Jesus about 800 years before, and he's writing to people in captivity and the promise, the blessings and the curses that go along with that. And in chapter 58, it says this, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom shall be as noonday. And the Lord will guide you continually. He will guide you continually, and he will satisfy your desire in the scorched places, and he will make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water for those whose waters do not fail. Hold right here for just a second. When I look at this, I go, okay, there's some really cool promises. It will be like a well-watered garden. You know what happens in well-watered gardens? Fruit gets produced. Like that's the promise. As we give ourselves away, fruit is gonna go. We're gonna be like a spring of water. This is exactly what Jesus said in John 7. Whoever believes in me, out of his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. What if your life just flowed out of you? What if you were that person that people love to see coming because you're gonna bring nourishment and care and concern. You're gonna breathe worth and value into them. That's what we're talking about. But look at what it says, that there's a promise of satisfaction. He will satisfy your desire, not when you get out of the scorched place, but right smack in the middle of it. What that means is you don't have to be anywhere else other than where you are. But there is a posture. Because he goes on, let's just keep reading, we'll run through this. He says, and your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. We don't have time to get into this today. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. This is a beautiful picture. And you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to dwell in. If you turn back your foot from the Sabbath, if you make this rhythm of rest a posture, that's what we're going for. And here's how he describes this. If you turn back from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, from doing what you want when I've asked you to rest, and you call the Sabbath a delight, when you say, this is a place where I'm gonna enter into and call it a delight, I'm gonna name it that, and then the holy day of the Lord, and you make it honorable. If you honor it, and here's how we honor it, by not going your own ways. In some of the places it says not pursuing your own pleasure, which means doing your own business. When someone says mind your own business, what they mean is don't get in mine. And that's kind of what we say when he says, if we just say, God, don't get in my business, you mind your own business, I'm gonna mind mine, that's what he means. You going your own ways or seeking your own pleasure or talking idly. So he gives us these things, and then look at the promise in this, verse 14. Then, guess what happens? You'll take delight in the Lord. And guess what happens when you delight yourself in the Lord? You get the desires of your heart. So do you see where I'm going with this? He tells us all these preceding things are necessary in order for us to take delight in the Lord. And so here's what I mean. Most of us, when it comes to this right here, we could say, is God pleased with you? You'd say yes. Has God perfected you? You'd say yes. Is God, the source? We would all say yes to these things, but the reality of our lives is most of us spend our lives trying to derive this sense of pleasing from people. Any people pleasers in the room? We're trying to make sure everybody's happy and content and thinks well of us. As we spend everything, we live under this pressure of everybody else and their expectations. I mean, is that where your pressure is? People pulling at you? People wanting you to be in 17 places at the same time? Like the one thing that I know, and this has been the hardest thing about my job, I know people demand. I know people, it's everywhere. It's incessant all the time, and I'm sure you feel the same way. Sometimes it's a husband or a wife or kids or an ex-husband or an ex-wife. Sometimes it's bosses, it's employees, it's higher ups, it's lower downs, it's teachers, it's sports. A million directions we are pulled, trying to make sure that everyone is happy and satisfied. All the stuff that has to get done in order for it to be made perfect. You feel the pressure for making sure that everything is checked off your list. And then finally, when everything is checked off your list, guess what you can do? When you get everything you need to get done, guess what you can do? Then you can rest. So rest now becomes a function of your ability to make sure everybody's pleased and make sure all your stuff is done. Anybody living in that race right now? You know what it says? If you turn away from this way of thinking and you enter into something else, then you're gonna be able to delight. Because you know what happens in this, when you're doing this all the time? Where do you think your pleasure is gonna be drawn from? When you don't get any pleasure from the people you're supposed to be living and the things you're supposed to be doing, you're gonna start chasing them in some kind of fantasy place or some place that's unhealthy. This is what happens. That's why I said you've got to know what pulls when you're not getting what you want. Because that's where the assault is going to come. All of us are prone in different ways. Some of you are escape people. Some of you have propensity more towards holding up and isolating and depression. Some of you have more propensities toward addictive behaviors or whatever. We all got something though, every one of us. And what he's saying is, and we think that somehow, and all of a sudden this whole chase is the desires of your heart. Well, this is just where I feel like I'm alive or satisfied, and it's all false and fake. And the reality is you can't give anybody anything because you're too busy trying to please them. You can't do anything. It's just all pressure driven. And you never find rest. And then it's just work, crash, work, crash, work, crash. And he says, oh, whoa, you're created to be human, and humans rest in order to participate in what God is doing. And what I would tell you is everything that you are asked to do and everything that people demand you to do is not necessarily what God has asked you to do. One of the greatest words you could perhaps learn is the word N-O. No. No. I am unable to do that. Here's why this matters so much. What it says to us, and this is exactly what it says. He says, if we'll take some time, that's what a day's about. I have rhythms in my life. I've bought into the lie that, hey man, if I work Mondays, man, I'll be a lot more effective. I can get my messages done on Monday than everything. I've bought into that before. It is a violation of what God has asked me to do. He said, take a day, take some rhythms. Make sure you have rhythms in your life to spend time with me, where your business isn't the first thing on the agenda, where your own play, where you're just kind of coming and resetting all of these things. I think it needs to be weekly. I have time daily to do this recalibration, but at least you need this. You need some kind of rhythmic week in this. But it says that it is by faith that we have pleased God. God is already pleased with us in the sense that we've been made. He's perfected us in that the gospel is done, right? It's a finished thing. I'm just gonna put this up there. I didn't even think about what to write here, but we've been made and created by him and for him. And he's invited us where he says that his glory, if you remember from last week, is actually met in our satisfaction. God is most glorified in you when you are most satisfied in him, when you can rest and trust him. I assume everybody in here would be thrilled to not have to live with the pressure to please people or being pulled in a million different directions by everything else or distracted and sort of chasing the things that we know we shouldn't because we can't get a break anywhere else. To delight yourself in the Lord is where you'll find the desires of your heart. It's easy to agree with. It's very hard to believe. That's why last week I was like, you've got to work to believe this. But here's what you do. You've got to make, I'm just gonna put it up here in the corner, some time to trust. Because what most of us do is go, oh yeah, I trust God. For what? Well, like salvation, Jesus. No, I don't know. What do you really trust him for? Are you trusting him that in your marriage situation, he's still working in ways that you can't see so that you're willing not to stop short? Are you trusting with your kids? Are you trusting with your job? Are you trusting with your money? Are you? When I say make room to trust or make time to trust, I mean trust him for what? Make a list. I can tell you, it doesn't take me long. I find there are things that I'm holding back from God. To make time to trust, what I mean is to sit down and go, God, this is what I'm going to trust you for. And the second is, you need to make space to rest. You know what I mean by that? I don't mean a recliner where you can take a nap. That'd be nice. I mean a space to rest. What a space to rest is, this is the place or the space in which you're actually going to trust what it is that you've said you're going to trust him with. So if you struggle to trust him with your money, place to rest is, I'm going to give. Tangible trust. I'm going to do something about this. If you trust him with your time, it means when I'm sitting down, about to have my quiet time, I'm not going to let my email bing 15 times. I'm going to create if I trust you with my time, then I don't need to be on my email or on my whatever device is pinging right now. I need to be with you. It means with our kids, it means with our marriages, it means that we don't have to chase something else. Do not stop short. You do not want to stop short. I shudder to think of all the things that I would have missed if I would have stopped when I wanted to, or even when I thought I couldn't go anymore. Because the promise is this: if you'll position yourself in this place, then, it says, this is Isaiah, then you'll delight or take delight in the Lord. And for some of you, the reason you haven't found that place yet is just because you stopped a little too short. How long does it take? We're going to talk about that in a series coming up. But this is your homework for today. What is it you are trusting him for, really? And then what are you doing in your life to actually demonstrate that you're doing that? Because that place is where you'll take delight, and there you'll find the desires of your heart. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for such an incredibly beautiful promise to us. God, that I know most of us are going to feel the pressure as soon as we get done here with all the things we've got to do this week already, and we won't even be able to hardly breathe. So, Father, I pray that you would just meet us in that chaos, bring delight in those scorched places, satisfy us in those hard places, and then allow us to move outward to arrange our lives in order to do what it is that you've asked us to do, to spend time and to trust, and ultimately to take delight. God, that's my hope, that's my prayer, and I lift all of this to you in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.